Excellent. Good afternoon, or well, let's say good day, Miss FIFA. How you doing? Miss Flora?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Exactly. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to meet you finally. Um,
Yes.
yes, my team lead, Aki and Nee, I've got a lot of good words to say about you. So finally, it's a pleasure getting to meet you eventually.
Oh, super happy to hear that. And thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward for this panel.
We really don't take this for granted at all. We're truly, truly appreciative of this, and I'm pretty certain that the other folks will join shortly. My executive director, Dr. Sasu Idrisu, we're off the phone just a few minutes ago. She will join us in a minute, and then also Mr.
Perfect.
Aki himself will also join us in a minute, and then we get on with it.
Great.
Truly appreciate this.
Yeah.
Right. Let me just nudge one or two persons, and then we just kick off since we're here now. Yeah, I can see the room is yeah, opening up. More people are beginning to join, and then we'll get on with it. Okay, yeah. Hold on. The climb in. Okay, just about time. Then finally, hey, all right, it's 3 p.m. on the dot from here, and I can see Mr. Akin is there already. Good afternoon, Mr. Akin. How are you doing?
I'm fine. It's good to be
Yeah,
here.
it's good to see you. And Ms. Flora is here already too. And I know that Dr. Sasi will join in a minute. I want to say welcome to every single person who is joining from wherever you're joining us. It's exciting to be here this afternoon. And well, it's a very sunny day here in Abuja. I don't know how it is at your end, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to have a great time together this afternoon. So it's our fourth webinar for the year from the Behavioural Insights Network. And it's our focus today is to sort of explore the opportunities that there are in behavioral science, right? The theme, of course, says from curiosity to the career, opportunities in behavioral science. And we're going to be exploring a number of questions that sort of open up or give exposure to all participants on what are the possibilities, what are the pathways to building a meaningful career or a successful career or an illustrious career. I mean, even coming back to even exploring the very fundamentals or the foundations of the value of behavioral science generally in the various fields of play and how anyone might be able to position themselves rightly to take advantage of the opportunities. And so I see the numbers are climbing. So we'll just give a few more minutes to more people to join, and then we'll be able to get on with the conversation. All right, one more panelists to join us, and in just a few more minutes, I'm sure that we'll have a full house of the panelists, and then we can get on with it. But before everyone joins in, I'll introduce myself. Femi Obidari is my name, and I am Senior Program Officer with the Policy Innovation Center. I work within the Behavioural Innovation Lab. And right here on the panel with me are wonderful, of course, thought leaders within the space. And I'm just going to introduce them very quickly. And from 3:05, we will get on with the conversation. If you're joining us, I'd like to hear from you. Please, you can drop in the chat box very quickly your name, where you're joining from. Just introduce yourself so that folks can begin to get to know you. I mean, let's as much as possible make this very engaging and interactive for ourselves. So yes, go and introduce yourself. Who are you? Yeah, I can see Esther William Deshi. Yes, you can also let us know where you're joining from, so that we have an idea of where you're at. Okay, it'd be cool to know that. In fact, it would also be helpful if you can just mention your organization briefly, who you are, what you do, and where you're joining from, as the numbers begin to climb or continue to climb. Okay, so again, I was going to say that, three wonderful panelists we have here this afternoon. First of all, mention Mr. Aki himself is here. Mr. Aki is the Behavioral Insights Lead at the Policy Innovation Center. And of course, we're also really honored to have with us Ms. Flora Finamofifa, who is, of course, the co-founder and the president director, Brazilian Institute of Behavioral Sciences. And of course, joining us also in a minute would be Dr. Sasi Idrisu, the executive director of the Policy Innovation Center. Okay, so I can see a number of people beginning to introduce themselves. Of course, I won't be able to mention everybody's name as you're dropping them here, but I'll just talk about one or two persons. I can see you, Daniel Yassim from Kaduna State. Thank you. From Kaduna State, thank you. And of course, Rebecca from Abuja is here. And Esther says she works with the Italian Defense Attaché. All right. Thank you for joining, Esther. And Lillian Ibe, Program Coordinator on Gender and Intersectionality at International Budget Partnership. Yes, thanks for joining us, Lillian. I know Lillian. Yes, pleased to see you here. And of course, Abigail, thank you. Abigail is joining from Abuja, and she's a media and communication specialist from CBN Africa. Thank you so much for joining us, all of you there. Of course, we have to get on with the conversation. Dr. Sasi Idrisu is also here. Welcome on board, man. Good afternoon, ma.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, ma. Good afternoon. All right, Dr. C, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, excellent. So we get on with the conversation then. Okay, so very quickly, without delay, let's just get into it so that we have quite a number of grounds to cover. And I'm just going to open the floor. Our flow is we're going to take his first set of questions around the panelists, and we'll take a short break where we just introduce, for those who don't know and who are coming for the first time or who are hearing for the first time, introduce Behavioral Insights Network so that folks can understand. And from there, we come back and then wrap up the questions from the panelists. And then we have a question and answer session where everyone can then ask whatever question they have in mind. And once that is done, we will be fine. Of course, some next steps and action steps for all of us will be done and over with. Thank you so much. Okay, so first off, I'm going to start our conversation by asking Dr. Sasi Idrisu. A number of persons are here and perhaps have heard about behavioral science, and there's still that air of mystery from my interactions with people, you get to find that out. So some air of mystery around what is even really behavioral insights, really. What is that? When you say behavioral insights, someone wonders, what is that? So how can you, Ma, describe this in a very simple, practical way, what behavioral sciences or what behavioral insights are, just to help our participants get a better understanding?
Okay, thank you so much. Please, can you confirm that you can hear me clearly? And just
Loud and
sure
clear,
that
Ma.
I'm
Loud and clear.
audible. Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Flora. Great to meet you. And good afternoon, Akinola. Okay, so thank you for asking me to break this down in simple terms. So when we talk about behavioral science, we're really just, let me start from the inside. So we're trying to, first of all, just better understand how people behave in practice. So just really being able to break down the conversation around behavior and understand how that intersects with a wide range of issues. And coming to behavioral science, first of all, is multidisciplinary. Please, can you hear me?
Very well, Ma. Yes.
Okay, sure. So behavioral science, first of all, is a multidisciplinary field. So you will not, it's not like the clear pathways, medicine, and then you do a clinical specialty in nephrology, or you're an engineer and you're just a civil engineer. So it's multidisciplinary. So by nature, you would see that it integrates a wide range of disciplines. So everyone is welcome to come into this field and begin to see things from that lens. So you would see psychology, humanities, social sciences, and basically what is everyone coming to do? Just really being able to look at that complete picture around human behavior, understanding how this impacts on decision making, understanding how evidence around how people behave shape either uptake of interventions, uptake of policy, even shapes the lens through which we view the world. So behavioral science really, in very simple terms, is just taking a different approach to look at how we can begin to make better decisions, looking at that behavioral lens, understanding how people behave, and then just being able to understand barriers and drivers of behavior or otherwise, from a lens that really ensures that when we put that evidence together from either humanities or social sciences, and we take a deeper look at things that we typically will look at on the surface, we are able to now profess solutions that are evidence-driven, that account for all the sort of barriers around poor decision-making or decision-making that is not evidence-driven, but then also just being able to test models within different contexts and to see what works for whom and to what extent that can now be applied at scale.
Wow, this is interesting. And thank you so much, Matt, for that and how you've been able to really underscore, first of all, the interdisciplinary nature of behavioral science and how professionals from different fields can actually plug into this and beginning to use it as a lens in solving problems or solutioning. And of course, the fact that it's very evidence-driven, rather, where a lot of evidence goes into behavioral science thinking. Yeah, and that's very valuable, I believe. I'm going to move to Ms. Flora very quickly. And this is a little bit personal, right? So what was that moment or experience for you that made you realize your curiosity about people or knowing how people go about decision making could actually become a career path? At what time did you find out that, oh yeah, my insights or my curiosity about learning about decision making and how people behave and what are those contexts that drive human behavior and co, this can actually be a career path for me? Yeah, it would be nice to hear from you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Femi, and good afternoon, everyone. Good morning from where I'm calling from. I'm dialing from Brazil, from São Paulo, and it's a pleasure to be here in this panel. So that's a really interesting question, and it's the first time I see we're doing that connection between curiosity and behavioral science. And when I was invited to speak at it, I wondered why haven't we done that before, since it's so relevant for our field. since this is my first time talking to a Nigerian crowd, I would like to start by pointing my first contact with Nigeria, which was through books, and
Oh,
specifically
nice.
through Chimamanda Adichie's work, which is one of my favorite writers.
Oh, yeah.
And she was,
Which of the books
yeah,
now? Which of the books? Which of our books? Popular Hibiscus or what?
yeah. Sorry,
Which of our books? Which of our books? Which of our books was
um,
that?
Americana, Dream
Oh,
Count,
Americana.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Beautiful one there.
She's great. And she was once here in Brazil giving an interview, and she said something that really stuck with me. That was like a couple years ago, and I still remember that, which was that m frequently in society we're getting used to receiving um, closed answers and closed positions, closed conclusions, and not arriving on our own to that. And she highlighted the importance of doing that reasoning process and arriving at our own conclusions in that sense. And I think that really connects to our theme because what guides us to that reasoning process, it's always curiosity, right? So curiosity is one of the most important traits for being a scientist in whatever field or working with innovation, policy innovation, and applying this science to the real world, because that's the fuel that will make us keep asking questions and not being satisfied with the current answers. And so curiosity has always been a guiding value throughout all my life. I think I was a really curious child and curious about human behavior specifically, like brains or why people do what they do, the different cultures every time I traveled, and why people react a certain way. But not only on an individual level, but also how the structure around that affects that. So I would always like play these mental games in which there was a issue, a policy problem, and how would laws have to be different, or a structure or a policy have to change in order for people to do what they do. And but of course, behavioral science is, let's say, a quite recent field, specifically here in Brazil. So when it came the time to decide from college, I was quite unsure between economics or neuroscience. I ended up in economics because it was the most traditional way, I guess, here in Brazil. But then I learned about these subfields of behavioral economics and neuroeconomics, which would probably connect. Um, all that perspectives, public policy and the decision-making perspective, and also this part about psychology and all. But that turning point, that moment was when I read the book Inside the Nudge Unit. So books, once more, that's a really important thing in my life, I would say. And when I read it, and I think I got it like in an airport store, so totally not planned. But when I
What
read
was the
it,
book
I
again?
was
What was the book again?
uh, Inside the Nudge Unit, which tells the
Oh, Inside the
story
Nudge Units. All right.
of
Yeah.
the IT, which for those who don't know, was the first behavioral insights unit in the public sector.
Yeah.
And in this book, they tell like how that was created, how it came from academia, and then all like the political part of it. And I said that was it. That was what I want to do. But the problem is that there were no like established career paths back then
Right.
here in
Right.
Brazil.
Right.
But that was when this drive of curiosity also came in hand, because if you're curious, you're motivated to do lots
Mm,
of things. So I
mm,
started connecting with everyone who would mention behavior science and writing blog posts, organizing a study group, joining all events. And then I met people from the City Hall, from an innovation lab, who were interested in starting programs with
yeah.
that. And that's how I got my first job, and then the career path followed the way through that.
Exciting. I think I really I like the idea of what you mentioned around how curiosity drove you to begin to connect with a lot of people and just begin to find out as much as you could, and then from there one thing leads to another, and voila, your first opportunity came. And I believe a lot of people who are here too are perhaps in that same category, just being led by curiosity, wanting to know more and wanting to learn more, and then connecting with people, and how that can make a lot of difference in perhaps setting up the stage for the next big thing that will happen to you career-wise. Good talk there. I'll move to
Right.
Mr. Aki here very quickly. And my question for you, Mr. Aki, is around your own personal experience as well. So what was that turning point for you? What turning point helped shape your career, or shaped your journey rather, in behavioral science? I mean, you've been practicing this for some years now. What was that turning point for you that got you deep into it?
Okay, thank you, Femi. Confirm you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you so much, Femi. Good to be here. My early experiences in behavioral science, well, we didn't even know it was behavioral science then. And like
Exactly.
Flora said, we were very curious. Growing up, I asked a lot of questions. Going into school, I asked a lot of questions. I was fascinated by the human mind.
Mm,
I think my first experience being attracted to behavioral sciences at all was reading the book Why You Act the Way You Do. I think that was Tim LaHaye,
yeah.
which was quite fascinating for me that you could actually typify people's behavior because it helps me to understand my social environment, and that was my first attraction to it. And then I went on to, of course, in the university, I didn't do psychological sciences. I did physiology. But even within the physiology, anything that had to do, for instance, we did brain science, in year 4 and year 3. That was quite attractive to me. Anything that had to do with the mind. Started off a firm called Think More Solution, just centered around understanding how people think and how that translates to behavior as far back as when I was in school. So, did a lot of opinion pieces around thinking. I used to call it technology, like thinking technology, like how
Mm,
do you actually
interesting.
think? So
Interesting.
quite a gamut of here and there experiences that actually shaped how I found myself in it. But one thing that is central, which Flora has mentioned, is that curiosity, even beyond the academics and all of that. I've gone on to do research work, even at the point where I opted for social sciences, that's public health. Um, my research thesis, when everybody was doing everything maternal mortality, my curiosity was around the relationship between your own personality and whether that can predict how early or late you start having sexual initiation, which they call sexual debut. So imagine somebody, and that was out of the world for a lot of my supervisors and lecturers to say, "Oh, you're thinking about, oh, if you are." I use the big five personality trait. If you are conscientious, are you likely going to start sex way early than somebody who is open? So those kind of conversations are not common. It also made me, be able to find balance between wanting to express it as a discipline or benefiting from it for my own personal study. So a lot of that snowballed into me working in consulting, doing a lot of trainings around human resources,
Yeah.
and all of that, up to the point of even writing a book just out of curiosity to say, um, I call the book Psycho Spirituality,
Mm,
which talks about
mm.
why people actually, um, despite practicing so-called spirituality, they don't necessarily have mental transformation that changes behavior and constitutes to social order in the society. So those are, it's just a lot of influence from environment, from curiosity, and all of that.
Interesting, interesting. What there's a recurring theme I keep seeing here or I keep hearing, and that is that interaction with books and materials by all the panelists here, wanting to just learn more and exposing yourself a lot to either reading or writing, like Mr. Aki has written a book even along this line. I'm going to come back to you, Ms. Flora. Now, sometimes people assume that they might require a specific degree to enter into the field of behavioral science, right? And interestingly, not so many universities, you would agree, are offering that a particular course that is called behavioral science, right? Yeah. So, but perhaps that's a misconception, right? So, if you could correct one misconception, a common misconception about behavioral science careers, what would you like to correct, for example?
Um, no, that's an excellent question. I think we should start by highlighting that behavioral science emerged and is defined as an interdisciplinary field. So we had two
Absolutely.
psychologists, Kahneman and Tversky, who learned to talk the economist's language And that's how behavioral economics started, right? After we had an economist and a lawyer, Taylor and Sutton, who merged those fields and applied to public policy. So it was precisely because of that collaboration of multiple fields that we have the field that we have today. And we can add to that, right? Design and branches, specific branches of psychology and all that. So we're not talked about a discipline that is defined within a university department, like, I don't know, medicine or law, in
Mhm.
which you have to do the course and get a degree and all, but
Yeah.
rather the result of this collaboration. And it happens both discipline wise, but also in sector wise, because what one of the unique traits is also that science is produced by application. So we have that collaboration between academics, practitioners, policymakers, which is quite interesting. And so I think that's actually an opportunity, because if we don't have a solid definition and solid like barriers of entrance, it means that you can enter whatever background you have.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And of course, that doesn't mean that you don't require specific training. No, that this is a scientific field, that it has a lot of things, but a lot of materials are there, and you can figure out your own path and be self-taught in the beginning. So there are a lot of intro courses online, or papers and books and opportunities like that. So network-based opportunities that can be a starting point to the field. I am an economist, so let's say that I come from a traditional background in behavioral science, but I guess I'm the only one, or one of the only ones from my college that works with behavioral science. And if you take the traditional route in your field, whether that is economics or psychology, you're not going to end in behavioral science, because the field requires that you're open to study like the other side, the other areas, and be open to new perspectives, and sometimes perspectives that are contradictory to what you first learn.
Yeah.
And I think there's always this insecurity in some sense. Like, I used to think that maybe if I had my bachelor's in psychology, it would be better off. But when I talk to colleagues that have their bachelor's in psychology, they're like, oh, but you're an economist, so it's way
Yeah.
easier for you. And so
Yeah.
I think that that feeling that I don't know everything yet, it's common, right? It's common, because it's true. We're never going to know everything. There are a
Yeah.
lot of different methodologies and a lot of possible applications. So it highlights the need for collaboration in behavioral science. It's probably the
Absolutely.
value.
Well,
Um,
yeah. Go on, please.
No, just to add,
All
because
right.
I had the opportunity to work and even manage a team of behavioral scientists that came from different backgrounds in the past years. And that was amazing, because we saw how we were approaching the same problem from different perspectives and talking different language, like different words. So we had neurologist, a nutritionist, a physical educator, a physiologist like Mr. Akin, and apart from economics and psychology from different perspectives. And I think if you have a setting that allows this collaboration, even beyond the traditional behavioral science, like mainstream program, that's really valuable. And that's a need. Right now, we're like seeing new methodologies, AI, systems thinking that
Yeah.
come from other
Yeah.
approaches.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah.
my my say is that if you're starting, you can start with your job and see how behavioral science connect with what's your domain, what's your expertise, and see that as something you can add.
Exciting, exciting. I mean, I like some of the points mentioned. I mean, one of the things to underscore is when you did mention that you don't have to be limited by the traditional path, right? I mean, this is really interdisciplinary field, and so you can come in from everywhere. The barriers of entry are sort of little, as it were, and not that Herculean. That's the first thing, and the very fact that, I mean, you can that openness, that willingness on your part to keep learning from every other person around. So you can't say, hey, I'm an economist and then that's it, or I'm a psychologist and then that's it. You're not going to do really well. You might not even end up as a very functional behavioral scientist. Yeah, you've got to be able to pick and learn across board, and that's very vital, I believe, for a lot of our listeners. I'll come to you, Mr. Akin, before I then go to Doctor in a minute, and I just want you to. So, I mean, talking to someone, for example, who is perhaps listening here this evening or this afternoon, and the person just doesn't have a clue. How do I even begin? Right. So I'll ask two questions. So you perhaps are able to answer these two in one very quickly, so that we sort of gain some traction with time. So first is, what would you counsel that beginner? I don't have a clue. How do I even begin to get into this field of behavioral science, right? And grow from there. And then secondly, what is one practical project or example in your work that shows how applied behavioral science really is strong and is of value, right? Either at work or problem solving or whatnot. So let's just take this very quickly before I then jump over to Doctor.
Okay, thank you so much, Femi. How do you, if I get you right, what are the steps to take right now if
Yeah, I
you're
mean, so I'm
quite
curious.
curious?
So someone is this year. So someone is listening now and has no clue. How do I even begin to get into that field? I'm excited. I'm interested.
Interesting.
What are those first few steps that I can begin to take to
Okay,
growing in this path?
interesting. Interesting. First, I mean, um, you would want to think that it's common sense, but I would really want to advise that you follow the top, if you can profile the top 10 or top 15 behavioral scientists in the world on LinkedIn. You can profile them and follow them
Mm,
um, because
mm,
your exposure that you're building a community, and
mm,
what you are doing by that is that you are educating yourself without necessarily your permission. So if you
mm,
go and let's say you even stroll into LinkedIn, for instance, by default, you know happenings and occurrences, you know events happening in the field, and then you also get to be educated about their opinion piece around several thought pieces and thought leadership pieces, just reading from them. I think that is one. So you need to network yourself, and that way of informal mentoring really helps. It has helped me personally too, and it also gets you apprised of information within the space. It also helps you to build a community. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is to be able to invest in study.
mm.
Because it is interdisciplinary, it's not a place where you come in and brag and say, you know, and it's just like if you're a general practitioner in medicine, you could have
Mm,
a touch and a generic understanding of almost everything that is basic to human health. However, when you begin to specialize, there's tendency that you have more focus and all of that. But however, on the converse, um, behavioral science, because it is interdisciplinary, you will need what you call range, which means that you're versatile in behavioral economics, in policy. There's an aspect of behavioral public policy. So you see, you see somebody who is a behavioral scientist can express himself well in policy, can express himself in design thinking, right? Systems mapping, network, and even predictive analysis. That's data science,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That you just going through your path or driving to work every day and just using algorithms and the Google map and all of that. There's predictive science that is applied to know what your behavioral pattern is, right?
Mm,
So you see
yeah,
that data science is coming in there, right? And you
yeah.
see behavioral science and it's still behavior. So my point is, because it is interdisciplinary, you will need to have range, which means that you're versatile in almost all the predominantly six domains or six disciplines within the behavioral sciences. So it helps you to be able to navigate your way and to apply yourself more effectively in the space. Now, to flip to the next question, which is around practical application. Well, in the nature of work that I do in Policy Division Center, there are several practical applications, and I will give about two. One is what the concept called present bias. So in the build up to the 2023 elections, we found that voter apathy was a major concern, which means that people had lack of willingness to actually turn out and vote. But more pressing and more worrisome was the fact that people were now selling their vote. And we felt, oh, how could we remedy the situation using our discipline and our work and craftsmanship in behavioral sciences? So what we did was to, of course, design an intervention that had a mix of several typologies of intervention within behavioral sciences and experiment with it. And I will give you two things that we did. One is we knew that present bias, just having community dialogues with folks in Lagos and Nasarawa State, we saw that the fact that people saw their share or the money that is advanced to them as bribe, as well as in exchange for their vote. People saw it as entitlement, right?
Mm.
We
Mm.
call it anyway, we call it hyperbolic discounting. The fact that I want to get this one right now and this chance to see this as a national cake or hand from it from the politician comes just once in a while, which is once in like 4 years. And I don't want to wait till 4 years before I hit my own part of the national cake.
Yeah.
So I'd rather take the money from the politician and use it to better my lot because I don't even know who knows tomorrow. I don't
Yeah.
know when next I will have the support. So we call that present bias, that inclination to want to have immediate results and gratifications as against thinking long-term, forward thinking and the consequences, thinking about the consequences of your
Mm.
action, which will shape your behavior, right? Um, and what we did when we saw that that was a major problem, just having conversations with them, was to bring in all the facts and all the lived experiences of people who have defied that present bias or that immediate pressure to want to take the money. And we framed it in terms of having an outreach with them and following up with communication around present bias. There are many ways around that. You are ensuring that they see the consequences of their behavior, and that helps them to um, have some level of restraint and choose wisely. That is one methodology. Another methodology was to ensure that they commit to an ideology for voting,
Mm.
which means
Mm.
that we are committed to the ideology of the politician that is ready to that show response or appetite to respond to immediate problems. And so they had a community charter that says that these are top 5 priorities in this community, and we're only voting for whoever is committing to our priority, regardless of the parties. So it was apolitical, but they had a common ideology. And that's a typical example of commitment device. So they carried placards publicly affirmed that they are committing to these community priorities. That's what we
Yeah.
call commitment device. And we saw some significant shift in the communities where we did this, just trying to respond to that type of challenge from the behavioral science point of view. So that's a typical example. Another example, I'm mindful of time, but I will say this other example before I flip. Um, is just trying to test user readiness. So, for instance, in the policy space, we had supported the governance setup or structure for digital economy in a state. And in trying to, so you had digital economy policy and playbook, right?
Mm.
That by imperative, we have different policy elements or components. And we took some specific components of that policy because it's difficult to test a policy holistically. So you test policy components, right? So
Yeah.
in trying to test a policy component, what we did was to have a use case of the implementation of that work around user readiness and user friendliness of digital interfaces that is owned by the government. So what we did was to test the user friendliness of those platforms and have different interfaces experimented. Type A, user-friendly interface. Type B, generic.
Mm.
There's no salience, there is no call out, there
Mm.
is
Mm.
no button calling your attention and all of that. And then slide C or type C, I can literally see my progression to say, okay, I have 3 slides to go, I have 3 more screens to go as I'm filling the form, and that enables my completion rate for
Yeah.
completing forms and all of that. So we tested a lot of that, just simplifying even the website and the interface and doing salience and call out. And we saw the massive effect of uptake just using behavioral insights. Over.
Absolutely. Wow, this is helpful. I mean, I'm going to share some of those practical examples and how, I mean, I personally like the counsel you give around how one might begin to work towards building the very first steps, profiling and investing a lot of time and learning, and then those practical project examples to sort of brings it to life. I'm going to ask Dr. Sui very quickly. Now, from all we've said to this point, it is evident to all that behavioral science is interdisciplinary. It's applicable in policy, applicable in health, in business, in technology, in education, mention it, right? Tax, what have you. Now, as you built your career in this path, what were those opportunities that surprised you? Like you suddenly just stumbled and you're like, oh, wow, this is surprising. I just didn't realize that this side could be applied in this way. And then voila, it's happening right here before my eyes. So it'd be nice to hear from you around this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Penny. Confirm that you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
So let me break it down from the complex things that Akiola about. So in terms of curiosity, that's an interesting question. So I'm a social scientist, and so I was first of all a social scientist, let me put it that way. And then it was interesting. And then from there, I had an opportunity to lead a couple of projects that required a lot of behavioral insights application in our approach to thinking through our research design and evaluation. And so it was very surprising to me to, at that time, I didn't have any real exposure or formal, let me use the word formal exposure in behavioral science. So it was really surprising to me to benefit of hindsight when I started to pivot into behavioral science to see that, oh, you mean that in solving some of those problems, or addressing some of those issues, we're actually applying behavioral science lens. But I think one of the most exciting things for me in my former life as a researcher and a social scientist, I still am. It was really always very frustrating when we do very complex research and then we break down the research into recommendations for policy uptake. And then you don't really see that real traction because, we're like 10 miles away from addressing all the other issues relating to behavioral barriers and ownership and understanding issues relating to sustainability, complexities around decision making, and just seeing how all those things limit uptake of policies. And so I was very excited when I had this opportunity to begin to work in the field of behavioral science. And I have had a lot of surprises, so many surprises in the last 5 years. I mean, one of it, first of all, was the relief I found in understanding that we could actually use behavioral science to improve public policy outcomes, which is at the core of what we do at PIC. So thinking through, for example, regulatory and policy shaping that is really informed by behavioral science. So either testing, iteration, and we saw a lot of that when we're working on the Edo digital policy, for example, using a BI lens, first of all, to think about stakeholder engagement, to think about generating around digital readiness, to think about building consensus for government ownership. So the entire spectrum was just like, wow, you mean that life could be this easy? And then we took it a step further now in some work that I think even for Edo and some work we've done recently, in also being able to use these principles to test models and test pathways. So it's like you're thinking about pathway to policy, right? And then there seem to be so many interests and so many alternatives, but you can actually take the evidence or the insight to begin to guide decision making in practice to say, if we go this way, if we take option A, this is where we will find ourselves, option B, option C. So you are actually co-creating with government and making it easy for government to come into the conversation around policy decision making without feeling that they've been boxed a corner. Because when I used to do traditional research, when you finish, you put the findings in a document to take it you present it to government, and then you come tomorrow and say, why is government not adopting this policy, or why am I not seeing the changes? But beyond that, I just quickly mention a few interesting and exciting examples for me, that we're looking forward to seeing how we can apply behavioral science. Surprisingly, just some reflections we've had this whole week around AI, ethics, and governance. We're beginning to see that in some of the frameworks that we're shaping, we can actually use behavioral science across the spectrum. We have a lot of innovators. How do we use BI to begin to help people to see? Because sometimes people are just so fixated on, I'm developing a product to save the world, right? But how do we take a step back to begin to use a BI lens to look at the entire spectrum? Of course, there's that whole conversation around being able to test your ideas, even making a decision on what is a felt need that requires innovation for either developing products or something. So looking within that governance and ethics space, and then also digital product design, and we've applied that quite a lot in PIC, but that's also something that was a bit surprising to me, that, oh, you mean that even in thinking through how a product is designed for financial inclusion, for economic inclusion, we could come through a behavioral lens. Demand, demand for health services, demand for economic services. Many times we create very fancy initiatives and we're like, oh, why is no one using this initiative? So it's been very intriguing for me to see how we can also use that BI lens to begin to think about how to develop products, not for ourselves, but with the user, and to also think through what uptake will look like. And then just generally, because I have to go back to where I'm coming from. So within my discipline, health, it's really spectacular to see all that we can use behavioral science to inform, from uptake of vaccinations and to uptake of services, and increasing access to maternal health, family planning, especially, and all just those conversations around risk communication, like we have seen from COVID up till now. Yeah, so these are just a wide range of examples. But if I were to pick one that has been most impactful, surprisingly most impactful, is just that share conversation around applying that lens in our public policy work. I think that's been the most surprising to me, because I have always worked in the area of public policy, but this is the first time I feel a bit happier or more excited about being able to create some magic in that space. So policy would be the number one, but the application is so wide and all encompassing.
Wow, super exciting, and how would I put it? It's just very relatable when you can pick this practical hands-on experience, and especially how things have turned out for you, the surprising effect, the eureka moments, and all those discoveries while you're just going about developing your own career, and then you realize that there's a lot here actually that could be explored. Thank you so much for that, Doctor. And by the way, I see a question in the chat box, Alexander Amos. I've captured your question. I'm going to read it out once it's Q&A time. If you have any questions, feel free to start dropping them in the chat box. We're going to capture everything, and we'll make sure that all the questions are answered within the time frame that we have. I'll come to you very quickly, Ms. Flora. Just one before we take the next thing. And I'd like you to tell us, from your perspective, what are some of the skills that matter the most in behavioral science, especially the skills that are not taught in the classroom?
Well, given the theme of today's panel, I might start, of course, with curiosity. I already said that at the beginning, but you have to be curious, because a behavioral science project will often require you to study. Even though you master the general behavioral science perspective, even though you're an expert in the area, every new project, you have to go deep on a certain topic, on a certain domain. So let's say I've worked in projects in finance, in health, vaccination, transportation, education, and every time you go for this new domain, you have also to learn the domain specific content. It's not just like applying concepts to a field that you don't know anything about. And that also holds for the context, right? Especially if you're working in like cross-cultural projects, cross-country projects, or let's say a community that's way different from your reality. And that's also true in terms of new methodologies that every time integrates with a new discipline or a new field that comes up. And I think often, like if you guide yourself with curiosity throughout a project, that will often point to what are the barriers, like what is this point that everyone is neglecting, that it's not well explained, and that can lead to accurate solutions. And so being a behavioral scientist, it's not about merely like applying an established framework, even though we have lots of them. We really like that in the field, and it really helps to remember and to guide. But it's not only about applying that established process. You also have to think in a certain way. So in a sense, it's also an art when you have to craft based on the understanding of the context, what would be the solution for that. And totally related to that, I would say that proactivity and creativity are also important skills. So you have to have that to think differently and in a certain way taking risks because we're dealing with experiments, with innovation, and sometimes it fails. And finally, you're dealing with humans, with people. So empathy, communication skills, like rhetoric and persuasion, listening skills are quite important if you're, for example, dealing with the target audience and trying to find insights that sometimes are not observed, right? Sometimes we don't talk about what we think, or we might think something, but we act otherwise. So that kind of thing is important as a tool, and also in terms of project management, because you will have to convince different stakeholders, manage that engagement, persuade about why behavioral science is relevant, so advocacy efforts in that sense. And also in my personal experience, I think that project management skills and learning new languages have also opened the door for opportunities. So I would add that.
Wow, exciting. I mean, I see a whole array of skills. Starting from curiosity to learning to understand context, right? I've been able to read context, yeah. And then, of course, proactivity you mentioned, creativity you mentioned, taking risks you mentioned, and very importantly, empathy, right? Being able to really listen to people and understand what is not being said sometimes, and also project management skills, right? Being able to manage those projects, of course, dealing with stakeholders across board, who you're dealing with when you're having to solve a behavioral problem or resolving an issue along that line. So really, I mean, it's obvious that participants here have a lot that they can begin to delve into, right, in terms of developing themselves and developing capacity, yeah, to being able to function within the field of behavioral science. Thank you so much. So we're going to take a short detour, and over the next 2 or 3 minutes, we just tell a number of us a little bit about Behavioral Insights Network. For those of us who are just joining for the first time, and bear it in mind, your questions are being captured. We're going to come back after this, and then we'll answer all the questions that we have listed out here. But we just need to talk very briefly about Behavioral Insights Network, and I'm going to just share my screen 1 minute and for 2 minutes or thereabouts, so that those who don't know about what we're doing, really, we begin to get an insight into what we're doing. Can you please confirm that you can see my screen? Anyone? Rebecca, can you confirm that you can see my screen, please?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll just run through this. So very quickly, everybody, you can see that this network is Behavioral Insights Network, and it is the first of its kind in Nigeria. What we're doing is building a community of professionals who are enthusiastic about learning what behavioral science and behavioral insights is, and how they might be able to use that for their own personal work, professional development, and solve problems, real problems, whether they are human-centered problems, business-centered problems, government-centered problems, academia-centered problems, as the case may apply. And you can see that for us, we've structured our community in a way that there are 6 different layers. And they're all locked up except the very first one. So meaning that those people who belong to the community right now are in that first level or first layer. And very quickly, I just take a look and see the 6 different layers to the community. Currently, we have a vibrant community growing. We started this community out officially sometime just a few months ago. We've been doing a lot of work in behavioral science prior to now, but then this community itself took off just a few months ago, and we have a WhatsApp platform that we use to drive communication and engagement every other day. And then we also have a mailing list where people can connect via email with us and have communication. So at the first level, you're simply just at that entry level, and all you're doing is just discovering. At the second level, you're growing within the community. At the third level, you're coming to advance your practice by getting into curriculum-based learning, actual practical depth learning, focused, either along the line of whether it is behavioral science in public sector or private sector or in academia. And then by the fourth level, what you're doing is to get into certain projects, curated projects that you curate with members of the community, and you together implement those projects. And then once that is successfully done, you get to the fifth level where you become a fellow. And then the sixth level is the level of being a trailblazer, where you then begin to build a legacy, as it were, within that space as a whole. So the very first level is the community entry level, and it's open to all. You can see it is open-ended and it is free. So meaning that if you'd like to join the community today, you can join for free. The link will be shared in the chat box by my colleague shortly. But from the next stage, which is the community member stage, is paid. The accelerator track is paid, and then interestingly, the project level one is voluntary; it's open, but being a fellow is prized, meaning that you've got to be able to have demonstrate learning by successfully implementing a project that is guided and curated. And after that, you can begin to work towards being a trailblazer. So it's good for you to bear that in mind. And just talk about some of the benefits that accrue to you at the community entry level, which is open to everybody. You just you have access to webinars like this. You see that, access to series of insights that we share on the community from time to time. We have what you call the behavioral code series, where we just pick up a particular topic and talk about it very briefly. And then we have a course on an LMS that is live, just introducing behavioral insights generally, and then seeing how that applies to corruption, anti-corruption. So that's open to all community members at the entry level. But at the member level, when you get to the paid level, you begin to get access to expert sessions that are bi-monthly, experts in residence sessions that are exclusive, and then hangouts. Community hangouts begin to happen at that level that only, of course, paid members, quote unquote, are able to have access to those hangouts and deep dive expert sessions. By the time you get to the third level, we are getting into curriculum-based learning, where we're actually developing your capacity either in academia path or business path or public sector policy governance path, weaving all that with BI. And then at the next level, you're working on a project, like I said earlier on. Then, of course, at the BIN fellow level, you're graduating from the project you've implemented, and then you continue to build. And the final thing I'll just mention very quickly is that, we'd like you to be a part of this community if you're coming to hear about us for the very first time. And we're going to drop the link. In fact, right away, Rebecca can begin to drop the link in the chat box, and people can begin to engage. And from there, we'll begin to build and move on. I'm going to stop here, and we just get back to our panelists. And we'll just answer one or two questions, or rather, talk about a few more questions, and then we answer all the questions that people are beginning to drop in there, and then we'll be done for the day. Just a few more minutes, and we'll be gone. Oh, Esther Williams, thank you for your comment. Bisola, you're asking how can you join the community? All right. Okay. So, Sam didn't see my projected screen, but anyway, don't worry. We can get around that when you perhaps join the community. If you do, Rebecca can drop the link to join the community in there, and then we can move on. All right, I'm going to come back to Dr. C just to ask you one or two more questions, and our other panelists, and we'll be done in a few minutes from now. Dr. C, now, many young professionals in countries like Nigeria really want to get into this field. I mean, and one valuable thing or one beautiful thing about Nigerians, and of course, Ms. Flora can know this, is that we're very opportunities driven. we want to, whenever anything is happening, we want to get in there. We want to know, right? We're a very happening people. Let me use that expression. So now, question is, for young Nigerians who want to break into this field, but then they feel limited, what are those unique opportunities that exist for them today? And if those opportunities are perhaps limited, I think it's good to also talk about them and just sort of help us understand how we might begin to position ourselves like we should. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Just confirming that you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
So I'm going to answer this question by telling a very short story. So at the time the Policy Innovation Center was being set up, the narrative then was there's no Nigerian behavioral scientist.
Wow.
And so it was the thinking
No, Mama,
then
sorry,
was
that needs to sink into everybody here. The narrative there was that there was no Nigerian behavioral science. How many years ago was this?
This was 4 or 5 years ago.
Just 4 or 5 years ago. Wow.
Yeah.
All
The
right.
thinking was there's no local capacity for behavioral science work
Wow.
in Nigeria. And so I was recruited as a social and behavioral scientist that would hopefully transform into a behavioral scientist. But that was the thinking then. And so when we started building, one of the things that I was very clear and resolute about was that we were going to build that capacity locally. We have, of course, relied on expertise from wonderful behavioral scientists and behavioral economists across the globe to support that capacity building. The inaugural executive director of PIC, Faisal, also was had worked in BIT, OECD, so he also brought some of that experience to support. But that determination to build for our continent and for our context was important. So one of the things that we found, so the very first thing we did when we started PIC was to hold a design workshop or design workshops across different sectors, health, education, agri, I think tech. And one of the things we're looking for was the appetite for behavioral science in Nigeria. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I also have good news. So the appetite was actually very low, but I think it was born more out of a lack of understanding of the value of behavioral science in improving public policy outcomes. So one of the things we have done in the past few years is to work against the tide and create that appetite. So we've never really walked into a room as this is PIC, behavioral sciences. What are your BI problems? Bring them and let's solve them for you. That never really happens. But what happens is that when we encounter problems, in having those conversations, we explain how behavioral insights or behavioral science or behavioral economics can improve not just understanding the problem, but also how that solution can be created. And so it's been a real organic evolution. Why have I given this history? So for a lot of young people who are here saying, do I have a career in behavior? Oh, yes, you do. The government has new tax laws now, right? One of the biggest areas that BI has been applied is in the area of
No, okay. I think can't hear you for a minute.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so it's in the area of tax,
Yeah.
And so what I always encourage young people to do is get an opportunity, like we've said at the beginning, is multidisciplinary. So if you have the curiosity, like Flora has been talking about, and you see that this is really the lens through which you can better impact your world, and then just take those baby steps in terms of, first of all, building capacity. And then as you build capacity and you open up yourself to opportunities. So a lot of young people who, for example, we have recruited in PIC over the last few years, and we're not necessarily expert behavioral scientists, but they came with the curiosity and the background to immerse, grow, and begin to build a career as behavioral scientists. And a few have moved on to continue that career in other places. So we will be the change that we want to see. And what we're trying to do is build this really big community of behavioral scientists that can use this lens to improve outcomes and decision making. And we believe that as we do this, then there's that real opportunity to begin to create more demand So as we do more work, more impactful work using BI to inform our work, then a lot more, the interest would grow and we'll find a lot more people getting interested. But even in your organizations, either in terms of organizational decision making, designing projects, designing interventions, you are a HR manager, you are a researcher, you're a policy manager, you can actually begin to use behavioral science principles to inform the work you do, improve the work you do, while looking out for clear opportunities to plug in and become the expert behavioral scientist that you want to be.
Wow, this is exciting, and thank you so much for this, Dr. Fasui. For everybody who is participating, I'm beginning to capture some questions. I want to encourage you to go ahead and drop your questions in the chat box. Just use the chat box. I can read them, I can see them, and I'm beginning to capture them because we're going to get to the questions shortly. So I'll just one more question for Ms. Flora and Mr. Akin, and that will be it. Then we can take questions and answers very quickly. So I'll come to you, Ms. Flora, first, and that's it. And the question has to do with for any beginner, right, in this field, one thing that is common is that sometimes people get to make some mistakes, right, while you're beginning to grow or begin to emerge in a particular field. So what are some possible pitfalls that someone might be likely to or is liable to experiencing, right, as a beginner in the field of behavioral science, and how can they avoid it? Yep.
Okay, so I have two comments on that. First is that there's a lot of common knowledge and like popular science out there. There are misconceptions about human behavior, especially
Yep.
now that we have a lot of content online or in books that don't have a really solid background. So do rely on solid references, learn how to search for and read academic papers. What are the trusted references? What are the solid policy cases? Especially now that it's so easy to just ask AI, and if
Yeah.
you're not an expert, you don't know how to verify that. And especially to understand the basis, the foundation of the area, like what exactly does a bias mean? How does it apply to context? Because you can understand the concept, but a different thing is to understand what that means in every in each context or how I'll use it. And you're not going to become an expert with only like introductory course, but you're going to start your journey into it. And the second point is that it can feel a bit overwhelming to master it all, like
Yeah.
all different case studies and possibility of applications, methodologies, and concepts, and you probably won't master it all. So at a certain point, I would recommend to specialize in a certain domain, in a certain methodology, which is an advice that I've received some years ago, and that really helped me. So it's important for you to understand the big picture, to like know how to work with someone who will do that, to revise or to ask to delegate, but you don't need to do it all. So, for example, even though I completely understand the RCT process, the quantitative analysis, I come from that background. I'm not the one who does that kind of analysis. Whereas when it comes from qualitative work or participatory methods, then that's the part that I usually focus. And the same thing applies to domain. I have worked in other projects, but in the past years, I'm focusing more on health-related projects because then you start like creating an expertise in terms of case studies and all. So maybe try to understand what is the interconnection of behavioral science to the area of work you're most like you're most motivated or that it requires from what's your position in your job, and also the methodology that you feel more nature it. You just have to be careful to not to bias yourself to it, like, oh, I'll always use this methodology because that's what I have an expertise on, because we're often using multiple methods, so
Yep.
collaboration is required in that sense.
All right, beautiful. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I've been trying to let people realize that it's important for you to gain depth, right? And you understand the basics, and you gain depth, and you don't just get superficial or carried away by. I mean, the power of reading solid references or solid reference materials very important. And then at some point, then need to specialize in a domain or a methodology. I think it's a good time for us to move to questions and answers. And I'll just read the questions out right away. We have just a few minutes to close, and that'll be it. So first question I'm going to read out, and this wasn't directed to anybody in particular, but Perhaps this one says that, has any of the speakers used their background and insight on behavioral science to engage in human-centered design? If yes, what elements stood out for them? Mr. Akin, do you want to go with this?
Okay,
I'm
thank you,
sure
Femi.
you've done this, so yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've done two projects. I drew example from first, the one I gave reference the other time. Um, which was around a policy project. So if you do a policy and you want to do human-centered design for policy, what you're supposed to do after all the co-creative design process, from diagnostics to simplifying the problem to co-creating the solution, is also to test the solution. And that's so under user testing, the way you do a user testing for a product is also you do testing for policy. And I gave an example of, testing a component of a policy, just using the user centeredness of their implementation hub. Um, they are the DPI, the digital policy infrastructure that um, enable people to access their certificates online. And so, if you really want to democratize access in that kind of space, and you cannot account for salience, salience means that you have call outs. It is user friendly enough. It is, some of the design elements from the white space, the aspect ratio and all of those kind of design elements, if they are not factored in it, and if you test the interface, it is simply a human-centered barrier to uptake of whatever you're doing. And so that's a typical example of, and it's iteration. So you test, they read, you give them a feedback the same way you do even for design of interventions. So you come up with a prototype. And I mean, recently I just wrote about the reversal of the language policy. And I said, for instance, if that language had gone through policy testing, you would have realized that we are too heterogeneous in Nigeria, and if you split it by population fraction, you see that we don't have a predominant population that correlates with a predominant language. That way, you would not be able to compare, where you are lifting those evidence from to say that this has accounted for better educational outcomes and all of that. But what is important is, even when you have references of where that has worked and you want to really experiment or you want to implement those kind of policies in Nigeria, what is ideal is that you contextualize it, co-create it, and have a phased experimentation, which is a pilot test of the implementation phase before you go full scale. So what you find, or what they discovered, was that a policy that was meant for a GS1, excuse me, that was exclusively meant for primary school, they were using it as way up as GSS3,
Yeah.
right? And it was scattered. The implementation was scattered. They were implementing and almost forcing the use of local language in some part of the country, while in some part of the country it had not even started. So those are examples of how policies can, prove or manifest existential gap when they don't use behavioral insights less. Giving an example of the language policy, I've given an example of digital policy, and you can also apply that to product. We've done an LMS. When we did the LMS, which they shared the link just earlier, we had almost, how many iterations, Femi? I think we had almost 7 iterations, in doing user testing and using implementing feedbacks on the platform. That's a typical example of human-centered design. Despite that, we had design workshops even before we designed the module, right? We did a needs assessment to know what the topic areas should be. We did a lot of, so testing is at the center of behavioral science, and all of that is human-centered design, actually.
Thank you so much for that. I see you hand up, Miss Flora. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, just to add, my first work experience was on an innovation lab, and apart from behavioral insights, the other methodology that they already applied was human-centered design. So let's say that we learned how to apply behavior insight in a setting in which that was also used. So of course there was cross pollination. And even though I didn't apply behavior insights in a human-centered design project, I would say that we apply a lot of human-centered design on a behavior insights project. But the first is something that you could also do. And overall, the agenda in Brazil has emerged quite connected to human-centered design because behavioral science here found its space and has like emerged in multiple innovation labs or innovation hubs within the public sector that were already using that kind of practices. So maybe unless other parts of the world, it has from the beginning had this like connection, and I think it quite helps in methodologies like participatory approaches to engage the stakeholder. So let's say you're working with a different department, and then you have to map insights, or also when you interact directly with the target ad audience, as Mr. Akin was highlighting how to do it. And so it definitely it can be a great interbridge and align the values of the project to what the target audience really wants. So it is a way of defining that.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Ms. Flora. But before you go, there's another question that I think is quite interesting that you might be able to speak to. And this is by Femi Famakinde. And he says that what has been the speaker's experience working with randomized controlled trials, RCTs, and how effective do you think RCTs are for generating behavioral insights, especially compared to other methods? And then says, which behavior model intrigues you most among all you've applied in recent projects? Well, let's speak around the RCT ones first, though. So the question for that again is that how effective do you think RCTs are for generating behavioral insights, especially compared to other methods? Can you speak to that? Yeah.
Perfect. So I think there are two pathways to that answer. One is the technical part, and the other is the rhetoric part. Okay. So in terms of like technicality, from my knowledge, the RCTs are the best way or the most accepted way to say that there is a cause and relationship between an intervention and an outcome. And it is considered the golden standard. And so you can have really precise indicators of how much and if that intervention worked. And of course, it has its limitations. So generalizability is one of them. If you test with a sample, you're not sure that will apply to another community, or if test in a given point of time, you're not sure that it will hold, right? And what is the outcome exactly that you're measuring? Maybe you're trying to do something that will impact well-being, and what is well-being, right? When it comes to like abstract indicators. So yes, you have some arbitrary decisions and limitations, but nevertheless, it has its value, especially if you can use that paired with other methodologies. So let's say you can do an RCT and also do a qualitative evaluation or some prototype testing. And so you can measure how much and also why, right? So answer different questions. But then the other, I think, value of that is rhetoric in the sense that it has played a really important role for behavioral science to grow the agenda, because a lot of like policymakers would come from an economist training or that evidence-based policymaking agenda would pay more attention to behavior insights because it was tested that way. It would generate more interest from academics
Absolutely.
because it would offer that. And it would also be a way to find room within the public sector to do these large field experiments, to do these applications. And so, from my experience, the first, as I mentioned, we started in an innovation lab that had the human-centered design methodologies, which would not do that kind of testing. They would just, the results, the insights were from the maybe some quotes from the target audience or other evidence like that. And then when we had a number, look, that letter generated that much impact and it can end in that much savings, you could see that it really gained some importance and legitimated the agenda. So I think it is a good methodology. It has its limitations. More discussion on the limitations and on alternatives like quasi-experimental methods or other approaches are definitely needed in the field, and we don't hear that often. But I think it's that it's not it's a tool, right? It's not a gold bucket, but it's a tool and it's a good one.
Wow, this is very insightful, and I really appreciate the fact that you spoke around how RCTs have their value from the technical angle and the rhetoric angle, right? Being able to gain trust among policymakers or even your stakeholders along that line. Brilliant way you answered the question there. Mr. K, I'll direct this question to you. I know we're out of time, but maybe just 3 or 4 more minutes and everybody will be out of here shortly. But it's important we get people to answer this question. Like this question comes to you, and it's two in one, so I'll just have you answer them together. First has to do with the person asks that how what strategies have you found most effective in encouraging stakeholders to incorporate behavioral insights alongside traditional research? I'll read it again. So this person is interested in how PIC applies behavioral science in co-creating policies with government. And so this person wants to know, what are those strategies that we found most effective in encouraging stakeholders to incorporate behavioral insights alongside traditional research? And the second one that ties to that is UNICEF recently launched a bird lab. You know bird lab, I know bird lab, so I know you can speak to this very well, sir. So how are we working with other partners to consolidate BI efforts in Nigeria? Mr. King?
Okay, before I
Good to see
go,
you. Yeah.
I see Doctor wants something to
Oh,
say.
yeah. Okay, doctor. All right, doctor. Yes.
I'll go after you. I see a question on AI and I want to respond
Yes.
to it.
Oh, great. Okay, great. So it's like there you go. Then doctor can speak there.
Okay. So yes, let me start from the second one. BIRD Lab is owned by UNICEF, and where we know that they're in Nigeria. We've established relationships with them, so we've had some series of conversations with them, and those conversations are still pipeline conversations. So I don't want to preempt what is going to, what is. I don't want to preempt what our collaboration would look like in the next couple of months or years. Um, but yes, we are open to working together with similar organizations. I think it's good to put that out. On the question of interesting approaches to engage government, to be more open to behavioral lens in their work. Like
Yeah,
Dr. Sasi said, the appetite is low. But one of the things, and I think Flora made mention of that, is also to rethink, when you have a problem and you can use a BI lens also to rethink that problem. So there are conversations, for instance, around framing, what you call framing effects. How do you communicate what you want the government to buy? And it's not just a
absolutely.
Nigerian problem, it's a global problem. Even in the UK, we're interacting with the founder of BIT, and he told us until he was able to communicate it in form of gains framing. Like what you're
Mm,
saving government when you do X, Y, Z. It started with tax administration using behavioral insights to save money, by ensuring that more people pay tax and they pay timely. Until he was able to do that and demonstrate that to the prime minister, they didn't have so much of traction. So yes, um, there's that challenge there. However, when you use behavioral insight lens also to solution for those existential problems, there are some ways that, for instance, you would have to do what you call political economy analysis, which is part of the situational analysis and diagnostics that you do if you really are targeting ownership and demand problem, right? Because you're managing the interests of the stakeholders, you are managing the power dynamics, you are managing the relational dynamics of every actor in that space. And you are looking at it from an ethnographic point of view, like from their how they live their daily experience. What is going to mean in terms of likelihood for them to hone that policy, hone that product, or demand from that product? So, such analysis, like political economy analysis, will help you to see how you can work with stakeholders more effectively. Do you want to keep some people just informed? Do you want to go to some people really to seek permission and such that and it's simple. So if you want to build an event right now, for instance, analyze the most important stakeholders in the line list of your guests, get the availability. So let the most important person, dignitary in that event, be the one to give you a date within your range. So you don't just open it. And you build every other stakeholder. You build your timing of the event around the availability of the most important stakeholders and let every other person align, right? That's a typical, simple, relatable way to use your political economy analysis to say, oh, without this person, this meeting will not hold. So I'm going to build every other thing around ease or availability. That's typical way to carry stakeholders along. There are many other ways, just by having a lot of consultations, and there are many layers of it for your information, for your attention, for your action, and all of that. But those are typical examples.
Wow, very insightful. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll have doctors answer or speak, and then we'll have to wrap it up and call it a day. Doctor.
Okay, thank you so much. I just thought it was important to answer that question, especially since we're asking people to, curiosity around a career in behavioral science, and then now there's a reflection about, in terms of thinking through the future of behavioral science in the midst of AI and automation. And these are my personal views, but I think they make sense. And so I don't see AI replacing the value of behavioral science. I actually see it amplifying it, because just as part of our work in the AI collective, we get asked a lot of behavioral questions every day relating to AI. So I think that behavioral science, first of all, will become more valuable, because as AI tries to make things easier, predict different things, and also in terms of just being able to make work easier, it will throw up a lot of behavioral questions around the ethics, in terms of how do you ensure that you're keeping people safe, how are you ensuring that the deployment of AI is ethical, is evidence driven. These are not questions that AI itself can answer. So there's just that whole evolution, I believe, would happen. And I think one of the things that I hope to see is that there will be new roles or career roles emerging. So as people talk more about AI for good, public good, and harm, we may begin to see, system designers who are behavioral system designers, AI, within the field of AI, but thinking about how to make things easier. Finally, I think that AI is going to automate a lot of things, but it's not going to change the essence of those things. So, and fundamentally, we still have to ask ourselves the question, why? Why this complex behavioral strategy? Why do we need AI to do this? What is the human emotion and cultural transition that are going on as we're using AI? How do we ensure that in the era of AI, we're still making ethical decisions? How do we place our judgment, and how do we ensure that whatever solutions that AI is providing can still be situated within the context where it can be relevant? So these are all the reasons why I think that behavioral science will still be relevant. And I'm excited to let you know that as we are thinking about developing our AI ethics and governance framework, we're actually relying on behavioral science to help us answer some critical and behavioral questions around how to ensure that AI is also relevant and working in global south.
Wow, thank you so much for this. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has stayed with us till this moment. Thank you so much to our panelists. Omobalaji Musa, your question around how do you begin to take steps when you have no academic or work-related foundation in behavioral science? This question was answered earlier on, so I would encourage you to watch the video when you do get it. A poll is being flashed on the screen right now. Everyone, can you just poll? It won't take a minute, I guarantee you. 3 questions, very quickly. Just this will not take a minute, and it would be great to have everyone provide their answers very quickly. So, I mean, interestingly, I myself am also participating on the poll. So just go in. And some panelists cannot vote. Sorry about that. So, but all the participants, just 2 minutes, and then answer the poll questions. 1 minute, in fact, and it will be over. And while you're answering the poll, there's a comment here by Lillian Ibe from IBP, I believe, and she said something quite interesting. And she did say that thank you for organizing this session. It has been insightful. I've been reflecting on behavioral science as a critical lens that can help us understand and fix why gender policies often fail in practice. The reality is that many inequalities that subjugate women and girls do not survive because people consciously choose them. They persist because of deeply internalized norms, automatic responses, and social incentives that operate almost invisibly in our daily interactions. Behavioral science gives us the tools to interrogate these invisible drivers of inequality, and frankly, it seems behavioral science might be the shortcut we need to accelerate change. Instead of waiting for beliefs or mindsets to shift, a process that can take generations, behavioral insights allow us to redesign processes and systems and interactions in ways that make equality the easiest, most intuitive, and most rewarding choice. In other words, rather than constantly reacting to inequalities as they appear, we can redesign social systems. Thank you so much for that, Lillian. Couldn't agree more with you. And thank you for that. Thanks for participating, everyone here this afternoon. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Dr. Sasui. Thank you, Mr. Akinomi, and thank you, Ms. Flora, for this. We truly appreciate this. And for all our participants, thank you for joining. The link to join the network has been shared again in the chat box. Please join the network. Let's engage and let's flow and work and learn together and grow together. I hope to see you all again very soon in another interesting conversation around behavioral science in whatever field of play that you might operate. Thank you so much again, everyone, and I'll call it quits at this point in time. Ms. Flora, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
Mr.
you very
Aki,
much.
thank you for joining us. Yes, and Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Thank
and
you.
all participants, thank you very much. All right.